Hi there, I'm Andrea Koppel, and it's time for coffee, the podcast where you get to hear firsthand what the jobs and careers that interest you the most are really like. Hey there, Java Junkies. Welcome to another K-Cup mini episode of Time for Coffee. By the way, K-Cups come in 3 sizes, single, double, and triple shots, or roughly 1 minute, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes in length. So if you don't have time to throw back an entire caffeinated career conversation, these K-Cup mini episodes of T4C can give you a quick caffeinated fix, whether you're on the go or you only have a few minutes to binge. So grab your mug and take a chug, because it's time for a caffeinated career double shot K-Cup with my guest, Fatima Doman. When I was reading your book, I was particularly, struck by how we use sort of the negative talk and how it's become a habit that we have our inner critics. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, especially when I worked at CNN and especially when I was covering the Hill and the State Department, I would be doing on average, if there was a big news story, 15 or 25 live shots a day on average. And
wow.
And if I made a mistake, let's say I stumbled or I rambled or I failed to hit the very specific points that I wanted to make, I would beat myself up about that over and over again. And I may have done like 15 live shots that were really, really good, but the 16th was one where I was getting tired and I rambled and I did this. That would be the one, Fatima, that I would focus on because I screwed it up. How can we silence our inner critics? How can we stop the negative talk that so many of us have engaged in?
That is such an important question. As a matter of fact, my new book, Authentic Resilience, has a foreword by Dr. Daniel Amen, who is one of the world's premier thinkers and thought leaders on mental health and the brain and neuroscience. And he's a professor at UC Irvine as well and has worked a lot on the NFL's concussion studies. And in his foreword to my book, he talks about automatic negative thoughts. As a matter of fact, he's the one who coined that phrase many years ago. And he shortened it to ANTS, A-N-T-S. And it's like having all these ants crawling in your brain, right? That's a good way to remember automatic negative thoughts. All human beings have them. That's why I was saying earlier that in the past, we have been wired to survive. And those automatic negative thoughts have probably played a part in that. However, they can get out of control. And that's what you were talking about, the inner critic. In my books, I talk about the inner critic versus the inner coach because I'm trained as a coach at Columbia University. And in our coach training, we talked a lot about, and we learned a lot about shifting this perspective from criticism to potential, so to speak. So, for example, if you're only listening to your inner critic, you might have a weakness focus. You might be problem oriented. You might have what's called a fixed mindset, blaming, judging, disregarding, feeling like, we know it already, or being afraid of change or looking for offense. So those are some of the characteristics of inner critic thoughts that pop into our minds. We all have them, but we can literally learn the skill of turning down the volume on our inner critic and instead amplifying, turning up the volume on our inner coach. How do we do that? We develop what's called a strengths focus. We become solution oriented. We cultivate what's called a growth mindset. We value learning and respecting other perspectives. We develop our strength of curiosity. We become more open to change. We look for intent rather than for offense. So there are many ways that we can turn up the volume on that inner coach to help us manage those automatic negative thoughts that we all have.
I love that. And part of the negative thoughts and how negative thoughts are actually like pollution in our brain, which is what you talk about in your book. You also talk about something called neuroplasticity. Could you explain that?
That's right. So this is so exciting about the human brain. We have learned that we can literally change the shape of our brain. We can even change the blood flow of our brain. So this is something that, again, Dr. Daniel Amen works with in his fMRIs. And, the studies he does with fMRIs, it looks at the blood flow in the brain and where it tends to go. And so none of that is fixed. He has something on his website called a brain gem. And all of us can develop our own sort of brain gem by shifting our focus consistently and using our will, right, to shift our focus to our strengths rather than to our weaknesses. And we can cultivate that ability to consistently look at what's going right in our lives and amplifying that. So one of the analogies I like to use about focus that I think is so powerful, I don't know if you remember Noelle Pikus-Pace. She won the silver medal in the skeleton. And she said that, and she lives not far from my home here in Park City, Utah. And she has this saying, you go where you look, because, you're careening down a track on your back, at up to 80 miles an hour. And where you shift your attention, where you shift your gaze, your body will go, your sled will go. So it's the same in life. Where we focus is where we will go. And we need to be very intentional about the trajectory that we choose to create for ourselves. So why not focus on our strengths rather than our weaknesses? That will take us to a very different place.
Thanks for tuning in to this K-Cup mini episode of Time for Coffee. If you want to listen to our entire caffeinated career conversation, please check out the show notes for this episode. Thanks so much for listening to Time for Coffee, where the professionals in the jobs that most interest you always have time to grab coffee 24/7, no matter where you live. I have one quick favor to ask you. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to Time for Coffee. Thanks so much.